Well, good evening. Today is Thursday, November 7th, 2024, and the time is 6:30 p.m. I will now call the regular meeting of the ISD 191 Board of Education to order. Welcome to those of you who are in the audience this evening here and those watching at home. Hello. Online. Sorry. You might not be able. Director Mirasol, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Director Hume.
Second.
Seconded by Director Gunn. Is there any discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries unanimously. All right, we'll move into the information portion of our agenda. And the first item on the agenda is to receive a report on employee indicators and orgometrics from Superintendent Dr. Battle and Mr. Joe Bird, Vice President of Operations for Infinity Systems. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Miller and directors of the board, and welcome to Joe Bird from Infinity Systems. We are partnering with Infinity Systems this year to help us better understand how we are doing in two major areas: our alignment to our mission and vision, and also our work to be an equitable school system. In both cases, we're asking for employee feedback through an online survey, and tonight we'll be presenting the results of the alignment survey, or what Infinity Systems calls orgometrics. We'll conduct and report on equimetrics in the spring. Mr. Bird will guide us through the results and how the survey works to measure alignment, but first I want to share some thoughts and provide a little context. First and foremost, I want to thank all of our employees who took the time to participate. I've always shared how important it is for me to hear from others in our community, especially staff members, and of course, inclusive partnership is one of our core values. We will use these results and the feedback we hear in other forums to understand what we are doing well and where we need to focus our efforts to improve so we can deliver on our mission and vision. Second, it is important to keep in mind that this survey is primarily about alignment within our district. Are we all pulling in the same direction toward our vision? The orgometrics portion of this is not a satisfaction survey. And while we did add in some of the same questions that we've asked in district surveys in the past, the scale is a little different, so it's not really comparing apples to apples. You will see as we go through that we can compare ourselves to other K-12 organizations, and Mr. Bird will share those states that we are being compared to, organizations in other states. And we can also compare our results from 2016, which is the last time we worked with Infinity Systems. Lastly, please note that my staff and I only first saw these results last Friday. While I'd like to share specific ways that we will respond to the data, the first thing we need to do is really to gather more feedback and to dive deeper so that we can really understand the feedback employees gave us, what their expectations are, as well as how we can learn internally what's working and what can be improved. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Bird.
Well, thank you, Dr. Battle. Thank you to the board and, of course, to all the folks listening out in the community. First things first, as Dr. Battle mentioned, the measure of alignment on our survey. We use this illustration just to make sure that we're clear with that. So, thinking about this race, or you've got your boat at the top. Leadership is clear, message is clear, everyone's getting it. Our oars are in perfect sequence. And of course, we're going right along and we're winning. The boat in the middle, the message is now slightly off, right? So now you've got a few folks that are, a little bit off cadence, not terrible, right? We're not, going out wildly off course. We're not running into each other, but we could be going faster, could be going further. Our boat at the bottom, right? Now we've got a leader that is further off message from the center. You've got a couple folks that are slightly off. You've got one person that's so far off now they're actually getting in the way of one of their teammates, and they're now going to be off as well. So we've got chaos down there. So what we remind everyone though is that everyone in all of these boats is working very hard. Right? They're engaged. They're showing up every day. They're doing their best to bring as much energy to it as possible. But it's quite possible, just as in these boats, that we're out of sequence. Maybe we're thinking about the wrong things, working on the wrong things. So alignment is really adding that purpose to that engagement, right? Everyone's working hard in the district. They really want to make sure they're doing their best. We want to make sure that everyone's doing that on mission, on plan, and really doing that on a day-to-day basis. So that's what we're really trying to measure. And we're going to show scores in these particular areas. So you see the 9 components. But our first piece of data is actually our response rate. So 72.5% response rate. We obviously want to get as close to a census as we can. We'd rather not be measuring just a small group and then trying to extrapolate that out across the whole district or project. So in this case, again, 72% of folks wanted to respond. I say that's the first data point because what that shows us is we've got a good amount of feedback. We've got a good amount of trust. We've got a lot of good ideas, as you'll see, as Dr. Battle mentioned, gathering more feedback, spending more time with the results even, just making sure that we really understand what people were saying, because there's a lot of a lot of participation and a lot of real desire to make sure things are going the way that we all want them to go. So the structure of the survey, we did measure 23 items. So we have 19 of our core items are going to be in these 9 areas that you see on the screen. We also measure 2 areas of just alignment, resources and rewards and recognition. And then there were a couple added in the district climate feedback focus area, which would have been some of the questions asked in the past. That way we can compare some of those things and just see how people are responding to those as well. So that's what we measured. Here's how we measured it. So when we talk about our scores, we're really talking about our 9s and 10s, or the folks that strongly agree. As you look at the scale, I'm sure a lot are thinking, wow, this is a really difficult scale. It's quite rigid. There's a reason for that as well. So when you think about the Net Promoter Score model used in marketing and communications, really trying to get messages outward, your 9s and 10s are your promoters. Your 7s and 8s are actually passive or neutral. And 6 all the way down to 1, those are actually going to be your detractors. And so while 7 and 8 is certainly not a bad score, we want people to be agreeing. That's definitely a good thing. But it's really hard, if you think about our boat analogy, it's really hard to interpret a message from a coach that's slightly off on the strategy and then somehow be in sequence and be in cadence, right? As things go outward in the district, the message is going to tend to get a little bit less clear, and you're going to see more variation of it. So we really want to make sure that people are in that 9 and 10 really strongly agree. And when we see the items themselves, I think as a leader, I think everyone would agree that when you see those items, you'd really want someone in your team, in your organization, to have no question that yes, we're doing that on a regular basis. So without further ado, here's our overall score, 32.5. And so again, what that's showing us is that 32.5% of the responses across the whole survey, all items, all responses, all focus areas, were in that 9 and 10 or strongly agree. We've got if we move to the middle here, if you've got our 3 boxes here, as you can see, we're kind of in that red box at the bottom. The next box up, so from 35 to 65, is kind of that goal. I would say over the next, next 9 to 12 months, we'd like to see, based on the feedback, based on the responses, it's definitely doable to get up into that 35 to 65 range, which is, really a good place to be. Ideal, and full disclosure, not yet attained by a K-12 district, is above that 65 mark. where if you think about, what would it look like if 2/3 of responses on these items were, yes, I strongly agree, we're doing that on a regular basis, there's no question about it. And as you can see all the way over to the right, our normative comparison to other K-12 districts, we're clearly above that. So good participation, good score as compared to the norm. And that's comparing to districts in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Texas, Georgia, Colorado, California, Arizona, Ohio, Michigan, and North Carolina, and Illinois. Sorry, I always I always miss one. So definitely, definitely on track. Good to see where those numbers are. Where the numbers start to make more sense are going to be now when we look at our specific focus areas. So 32.5 was across the whole survey. As you can see, some of those areas were higher, some of those areas were lower. Accountability being our top scoring focus area at 54. Down to creativity at 16.49. And you can see our alignment measurements and our district climate feedback measurements down at the bottom as well. Those two are not part of the overall score, just the accountability through creativity. Now on this slide, we wanted to show you the distribution of responses as well. So again, our overall score being 32.5, that's going to be our 9s and 10s or strongly agrees. The 7s and 8s are the folks that are agreeing, 28.39. And then 6 down to 1 are neutrals down to disagree, 39.9% of those responses. So in a nutshell, what we're really trying to do is move those folks that are in that agree category. If we can move those over to the strongly agree, if we can move a good portion of the folks that are neutral down to disagree up to the agree level, we'd like to see, again, the green and yellow go up and the red go down, ideally. And the wheel, so 0 being the middle here, the further out those points go, the stronger the score, or the stronger the level of agreement. This really starts to make sense with more data to compare. So year over year, as you see the wheel, hopefully it's going outward. As you can see, though, accountability is a strength. Mission and vision also being a strength. Ideally, we'll move everything outward. But it's not uncommon to see the strengths remain the strengths and the numbers that are relatively lower. They can still go up, but they may still not be the strengths of your district. And this is a look at adding the 7s and 8s. So again, really rigid scale. So our, just looking at our 9s and 10s, those are our scores on the left-hand column still. But now what we've done is added the 7s and 8s to that number. So as you can see, nearly 80% are in that strongly agree up to 7 to 10. So accountability, mission and vision, and teamwork, as you can see, are looking quite a bit stronger. And so this is another bit of good news, because what happens in a lot of organizations that we've seen, and we work with, I mentioned the K-12 districts in those different states. We also work with law enforcement, we work with government, we work with a lot of corporate entities. And in a lot of those cases, what we can see is when we add these 7s and 8s, the number's not going up quite as much. And what that's showing us is that there's a real polarization. So there's folks that strongly agree, and there's folks that disagree. And so in your case, seeing that number go up significantly, right? We've almost got as many in that 7, 8 as we have in the 9 and 10 overall. And so that shows us that there's a lot of folks that are in that 7, they're agreeing, they're on the right side of the scale. The question is, what would it take to, or two questions. One, what would it take to get those folks from, yeah, I'm kind of seeing it, to, yes, definitely I'm seeing it. And then the other question would be, what would things look like around the district if everyone was seeing and hearing and really understanding the mission and vision and seeing that applied on a day-to-day basis? And the next slide is going to be normative comparison. So I know there's quite a bit to look at all at once here. So I would actually start at the top with the response distribution. So looking at your survey that we've just closed on the left, the same numbers there, 32, 28, and 39 as far as green, yellow, red. Compared to other K-12 districts, as you can see, we're slightly higher on the strongly agree and the agree, and then obviously lower on the neutral down to disagree as well. And you can see how the focus areas compare. And as you can see, the center chart as well shows you that, again, that mission and vision, significantly higher. Accountability, but what's also interesting is that you can see that K-12 definitely has a pattern or a shape. The mission and vision is generally high, although yours is higher even than the norm. Same with accountability. And then Dr. Battle mentioned the 2016 scores, so you can see how those compare. So we definitely now have more folks in that strongly agree. Looks like there was a few more folks kind of in that tentative agreement back then versus now, and a pretty similar number in our 1 to 6. What I find interesting here, so a couple things. One, the mission and vision jumps out first, really clear picture. There's more people that are saying, yes, I'm understanding the mission and vision. Empowerment, right? People feeling that they've got the autonomy, they've got the support to bring their best to the district every day. And then I think it's noteworthy that communication is higher as well, because these other things aren't grown and supported without strong communication to be able to show people what we're here to do. And what often gets missed is letting people know when we're doing it well, so that they can understand that, right, we are making progress and these things are bringing us forward. And so if we go down another layer into the survey, you can see, so those focus areas are going to be a combination of multiple items together. If we go down all the way to the individual item itself, in this case, we've got our top 4 and our bottom 4. And so what this is showing us is that within the accountability within the accountability focus area, the very highest scoring item on the whole survey was people feeling a strong sense of responsibility to meet performance goals and objectives. On its face, when you read that, hopefully everyone in the district is saying, yes, I do feel a responsibility to meet my goals and objectives. We need that to be high. The fact that it's the highest is definitely a good thing. It's a great foundation to have. If people are connected to that mission and really feeling responsible for their goals, obviously they're gonna be able to do the best work. Teamwork is another important aspect. So having a sense that we're working well together as a team, great foundation to have. You've got people that are holding themselves accountable. If we're working well as a team, we're better able to hold each other accountable. So definitely a good sense there. And then mission and vision, actually seeing both of these items up here is really important. One, because if we don't know the mission and vision, it's really hard to carry it out. But two, in a lot of, especially in K-12 districts, what we've seen is that first one is high. People say, yes, I understand the mission and vision. But in a lot of cases, you'll find people that, I'm not understanding how my day-to-day work is actually supporting the mission and vision, right? I'm here, I'm busy, I'm doing things, but I'm not sure exactly what's supportive. So that is a really important factor to have those so close together, which again speaks to good communication and I wish to not just good communication, but clear communication about the mission and vision and the importance of what we're doing. And then our bottom 4, so if we flip the scale over and now look at the items that had the highest percentage in that neutral down to disagree, Communication is one of them, and disclaimer, that is always in at least the bottom four, if not number one. So, and that's why I mentioned that the shape of the wheel often stays the same, because even as we improve communication and that score goes up, it's also pushing everything else up. So communication is probably an area where people are always going to say, you know what, we should communicate more differently. I've got a suggestion for what we should communicate differently. So that's not a bad thing, but it is just, it's a baseline, so we can look at that and say, okay, what would we do to make these things, stronger? Creativity, employees' ideas being valued, and suggestions being valued. That is also often toward the bottom. And what we end up finding with that is that it's not necessarily, we don't encourage creativity. It's that we don't have good mechanisms in place to really show people where ideas are coming from and what's happening with ideas when they're brought. So it really just comes down to fostering that culture of looking for new ways to do things. But what often gets missed, even if we're being resourceful and finding new ways to do things, that doesn't often get communicated formally, right? There may be pockets that are happening around the district, and then when you start to look in site data, demographic data, you may clearly see that there are things happening in certain classrooms or certain buildings, certain departments that are working really, really well. But how do we get some of those best practices to be a little bit more global, a little bit more standard, so that we're all doing the things that are working the best, which ties perfectly into best practices, looking outside the organization to see best ways to do our work. In K-12, the most common situation here is that as we're in the center of the district, we're bringing in those best practices, we're having those conversations, we're going to conferences and seeing the kind of the leading process and things we need to do. As that gets implemented, though, as it goes further out in the district, it's harder and harder for people to realize where that came from. So it by the time it comes to gets to the classroom, for example, it's just what we're doing, right? It's not really communicated clearly about why we're doing it, what are all the benefits, how this is going to make you a better teacher, how it's going to support your students. And then again, that I think also ties to the next one, which is going to be development. And so again, just the formal aspect, the really clear communication around how I can bring my best self to work within the mission and continue to grow that, not just in this role, but in career overall as well. Then our district climate feedback items. There's a little bit more to take in on this one. So. But in this section, we asked about recommending the district as a place to work, being proud to work in 191, feeling that work is valued by school leadership, feedback being encouraged and valued, having a clear understanding of the district's mission, feeling that my work aligns with the district's mission, resources, I need to talk to families about who we are as a district, promoting its successes as a district, and feeling positive about the direction of the district. And so in each of the focus areas, of course, there is the numerical response that we've shared. There's also a comment section. So lots of employees had lots of different things to say. Each of those sections, throughout all those comments, we were able to pull together kind of clusters. So as particular topics were mentioned more, we can see that kind of forming. And then, for example, communication issues, most of that topic, when that was mentioned, there was conversation around feedback, around follow-up, and around consistency of communication. workload and support, leadership and management, professional development and growth, and then morale and retention. So some of these are directly related to some of the items that we surveyed on. Others are going to be more results of what happens when we take those actions. So like morale and retention, for example, as we see that stronger communication, as we see that better understanding of the mission and vision, as we see that strength and development, that creativity, that should be better for morale and retention. And then the sentiment, we were able to see which things were positive, which things were more negative. And another disclaimer as far as the comments go, we do just by nature tend to see more comments leaning more onto the negative side, just because even if someone's just saying, I have a suggestion about something, right, it may not be saying something negative, but you are saying something could be improved. So there's going to be kind of a negative sentiment to that. So, of course, we did see some negative sentiment. We also saw some positive sentiment. There's lots of focus on there. People mention specific supervisors that are doing good things. So those would be examples of some of those best practices that we want to dig into. Team camaraderie, which speaks to that high teamwork score. A sense of pride in working in the district was mentioned quite often. But of course, concerns and feedback on what we think we can do better was mentioned a lot. So, which again, from our team perspective, we see that as a good thing. If folks are not wanting to share, right? If you have a really low participation rate and you're not seeing comments, in a sense that can be worse because people have decided that they don't think they're going to be heard or they don't care enough to share that feedback. So we want to keep getting that feedback so we can make improvements. And the way that Dr. Battle and team are working on that, we've talked about really leveraging strengths. So again, that accountability is going to be huge to build on, right? You've got a lot of folks that know that this is their calling, this is their mission, this is what they want to be doing. And so if they can really have a clear picture of what that is, what that means, they're going to continue to thrive in that. And one of the things that, as we tie accountability and mission and vision together, one of the things that really works well, especially in K-12, is really making sure the clearer that we are mission focused when introducing new ideas, when evaluating things, the more tied to that mission is, the better we can hold each other accountable. Because if I introduce a new initiative, and you ask me, what parts of the strategic plan does that really support, right? What part of the mission does that really further? Right? If it doesn't, right, it's not going to be a strong thing. But I know that, okay, you showed me objectively where that fits and where it doesn't. It's not a matter of, did you like my idea or not? Or do you like me or not? And so that really mission-driven, mission-focused conversation is going to be key to that. Teamwork, again, you've got that camaraderie already. You've got a lot of folks that are feeling that bond, that connection. So if they're clear on how to hold each other accountable, we know exactly what the mission is and how we're to meet it. That team focus is going to be a real strength in that. And then of course empowerment. So folks that feel that they've got the autonomy to take that initiative and really run with the mission and vision. It's theirs. They're taking ownership of it. If we can get more and more folks to feel like that, then we're just going to have more people doing their best work, and obviously that's better for all the kids and the community as a whole. A couple things that we often see working together would be links. So accountability and empowerment are often closely tied together. So in organizations where accountability is really high, but empowerment is really low, you end up with a sense of, well, I've got to be here. I'm going to show up. I'm accountable to show up every day, but I don't feel like I have the autonomy or the license to do my best work or bring even my full self to work. So I'm just here. So we definitely don't want to see that. The fact that you have an empowerment score that's high, especially relative to your accountability score, is a real strength. That is a real good thing. Mission and vision is going to work really through everything, right? It's it's why we're here, right? It's the purpose. And so the more we can include that in any conversation possible, the better. Any reward, any recognition, if we can show where that connected back to, the mission or the pillar, the core value, the better. And of course, that's only going to foster accountability, leadership, right? As our leaders go, so goes the district, right? If we can make sure that the clearer the message is going outward, understanding what's happening as the message comes back to you, so you can see what was caught, what was missed, what can we do differently when we communicate differently next time, and then of course best practices and creativity overall, just making sure that I know that we're always looking for best ways to do our work. Sometimes that just doesn't always get as clearly shared as well. So making sure that people know where that's coming from. And then there was a couple interesting focus area gaps, and it's not uncommon to see these, but so teamwork, for example, one of the items is working well together as a team. One of the other items is teams working well together between teams. So we don't expect that to be 100% even in any type of organization, but especially in K-12. I mean, there's people are working in completely different buildings, not necessarily interacting or collaborating with each other. But if there are ways to help certain teams understand how they connect to others, how their work is supporting theirs, how the other group's work is supporting them, can be a big boost. Similar with accountability, so personal accountability and group accountability. It's much easier to hold yourself accountable because you know all the goals and you can look in the mirror and say, well, this is me and I know what my goals are. But holding each other accountable can sometimes be more challenging. And so that gets back to, again, the understanding of mission-driven, mission-focused conversation. We can hold each other accountable to that mission, and we must. And then empowerment is an interesting gap as well, because people don't feel that they're, you have a high score in empowerment, so people don't feel like there's a supervisor over their shoulder, bugging them about every little detail. They're not being micromanaged. But the other item, talking about more of system-wide, there's a feeling that something is holding me back, something is holding us back. And so a lot of times with strong communication, with good leadership, we can help folks see, there's a lot of things in place. Yes, we need systems in place. We need those things. But a lot of times we don't understand why those are there. We don't understand how those are helping us. We don't understand how they're helping the students. We don't understand why this system versus that system. So being able to really share what those advantages are, but also just helping, we call it small L leadership, right? The leaders in the organization, the folks that have been here the longest, they've, in some cases, figured out some of their own systems. They've got different levels of resourcefulness, and they're doing a lot of good things. They're teaching, new staff members. They're teaching folks that, what to do, sometimes what not to do. So the empowerment levels and finding good ways to get, for example, principals to, find who's doing an interesting, innovative thing in a classroom, and what did they learn from some of the folks that don't necessarily have a leadership title, but they're experienced and they're doing a lot of good things. They care about the mission and vision, and they are, learning and doing good things. And so how do we have people empowered to really find those ideas and really share those and keep things moving outward so that we're all doing our best work. So again, finding out more about what's happening. We say kind of for better, for worse, this brings out more questions than answers. But those questions that you're asking each other, that you're asking yourselves, that you're asking staff members, they're going to lead to good things, because we know how much people care, and we know that they're going to be able to do their best work if we continue to harness that. So zooming out to look at what's happening district-wide, but also looking specifically at some of the pockets of the district with some of that demographic data. The comments are a good way to really get a deeper understanding. There's more context there. We see the numbers, but people are sharing very specific things, so those could be immediately actionable. And of course, the areas of strength. I think it's really important not to just say, here are the things that are negative. There are a lot of things that were strong. We'll see that both in the numbers, as you saw the higher ranking focus areas, but also even in the comments as you look at some of that positive sentiment. We want to make sure that those things are continued. Obviously, feedback and discussions, and overall, again, if we continue to ask those questions, we can continue to, get more answers and hopefully make more progress. So with that, I will turn it back over to Dr. Battle.
So thank you, Mr. Byrd. So my goal is to have a strongly aligned district where my employees will score 9 or 10. So I had to reflect on when I was a teacher. And my students, if 10% of them failed a quiz or an assessment, I had to take a look of how to personalize or differentiate to meet those students' needs. If a quarter of my students failed on an assessment, then I had to look at my teaching. I needed to reteach in different ways. So seeing that not agreeing at 39% is something I would never accept as a teacher, and so I'm not going to accept it as the leader in this district. So a little bit more about next steps, even though I'm not going to have a detailed specificity. As Mr. Byrd said, we need to dive deeper into the data, look at building, school. It's interesting, we do get information about generational. There's kind of no difference. So I'm a boomer. So the millennials, we're not seeing that. But it's interesting, Mr. Byrd will tell you in other organizations, there are wide differences, not in education, but wide. So I found that very interesting. So we're going to do a little deeper dive in disaggregation. We will absolutely look at the comments that staff shared, continue with discussions, possibly focus groups. Really curious about the strengths. So what made you indicate a 9 or a 10? What did it look like in those areas? And of course, how people are experiencing where they did not agree. This is the first of 2 surveys. Again, Equimetrics will be in the spring. It is not, it wasn't planned that later this evening you're going to have a request from our band and orchestra teachers for a trip, band trip, but I will talk to them about how they get that alignment. If you think of an orchestra with all those different instruments and all those different students, when they play that piece, it is all aligned, and it's a beautiful thing. So with that, I want to thank Joe and Infinity Systems, and again for staff for participating. I'll turn it over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Battle and Mr. Byrd. Board members, any comments or questions this evening?
I have a question.
Byrd?
So this is employee district-wide, so I'm just curious about, in the survey, is there a distinction between like what departments employees are in, like, so we're able to distinguish between like these groups of people are saying more dissatisfaction as opposed to these people? Like, are we focused more on teachers, or, who's more dissatisfied than others?
Mm-hmm. Yep, there's data by site, there's data by position, the type of site that they're in, generation, years of service, so how long someone's been in the district, gender, race, ethnicity. I feel like I'm missing one, but there's quite a few different areas that we're looking
Okay.
at. Yes, we can look at it in lots of different.
Very detailed.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
I'll go first. I was pleased by the response rate. I think that was pretty extraordinary. Was it 700 and something? It was like a 70% response rate or something.
Yep,
So,
72%.
72. That's I've never. It's incredible. I do surveys at my day job, and we never get even remotely close to that. So, Obviously, there's a lot of good feedback. Dr. Battle, I appreciate your comments about needing to dive a little bit deeper before really knowing what the next steps may be. I guess my question, and I don't know if you even really have an answer, but are there things that you have observed from doing this work the districts maybe have implemented that have made an impact on some of these scores?
There definitely is. Some of those we've shared in the with our comments. We've got actionable suggestions that come back with that. So in the reports, and yeah, we do have some recommendations specific to the accountability area, the empowerment area, the teamwork area. And I would say communication and leadership would probably jump up to the top as like things that we can really think about on just, again, trying to communicate the mission and vision as specifically as possible as we can. But Dr. Battle is on it in terms of focus groups, I should say. Just getting feedback from folks about what they were saying when they responded, what they're saying now. I would say, one bit of advice would be recommendation would be to use some of the language that comes out of the survey. So people did mention specific areas that they thought were most concerning or they most wanted to share about. So getting that, weaved into the conversation as specifically as possible is going to be important, just so folks can know that they were heard. 72% of people shared. Again, good thing.
Yeah.
Now bringing that back and showing them that not only did you hear them, but we're going to take action on those things is going to not just have participation stay high, but obviously help make some progress on those things. So I guess the short answer is there's like a really, really long list of things that that you can and should do. But I would say the easiest thing to do as far as recommendations go is to break it down into sections and just grab one of those focus areas at a time, and just think about what we can do within that area. And I think talking to some of the staff about it is the best way, because they're the ones that are going to be doing it.
Sure. Thank you. And that brings me to my final comment, which is probably more for Dr. Battle, if I can remember what I was going to say. Organizational change takes a long time, as I know you know. So if there are things that can, kind of the proverbial low-hanging fruit, I'm a fan of low-hanging fruit when trying to make changes, and at least, what are the easy wins, the things that can have an impact in the short term while we continue to make plans to address things in the long term as well. So that's my unsolicited advice for you.
Thank you. The author of Director Hume and members of the board, the author of Good to Great, talks about those small wins first. And that'll build the
I think I might
trust.
have read that in grad school. Maybe that's why
I'm
it's always in the
forgetting
back of
his
my mind.
name, Joe. I can't remember his name. The author, Good to Great. It's okay.
That's all I had.
Thank you, Chair Miller. Yeah, I would first like to thank the folks that participated in the survey, because as leaders in the district, of course, we're here to support our students, and it's also equally important to support our staff and make sure that we're helping Dr. Battle and her team, with their work to make connections. And I found it interesting. One comment and a question. It seems like the theme coming out of this is, personally, people are really set with their responsibility and ownership of their role within the district. And as a system, we need to do a better job of making connections between teams you had mentioned, right? Breaking down silos that might exist, communications, making sure that our communications are really landing where they need to and in the way that we intend, so that, you just got me thinking about when you commented about how change is implemented, and by the time it reaches the school building, people might not know why, and that it actually started with a colleague. And that was just, I was like, oh, yep, we absolutely need to make sure that that's happening. Director Hume, you made a comment about change being slow. And that was something I was thinking about. And I guess my question was, at the beginning of the presentation, did I understand you correctly to have an expectation that between now and spring, change would happen?
Yes. Well, now in spring, I would say now and next fall when we
Next
when we
fall.
survey again.
Okay.
Yeah, because the spring will be a different survey. It's measuring different things. So no, we wouldn't do the same survey again in the spring. But yes, I mean, as you know, you can have some of these conversations yesterday. And so just making sure that people start to see that and start to understand that there can be really slight changes that have a really big impact. So.
Awesome. And appreciating too, Dr. Battle, that you're thinking about focus groups and, kind of gathering more information to inform what it is that you and your team need to do to leverage those strengths. I appreciate that.
Kind of following up with that, so hearing that there'll be another survey again in the fall, is the frequency of doing the survey annual? Because we were seeing 2016, so it's like, it's been a while. And so it's just kind of curious in terms of the frequency, because change is slow. So if you're going to plan for change to see the impact in a survey in the future, you're going to, of course, space out the survey. But I didn't know if there was kind of a standard, like, is it annual? Is it every other year? Is it,
Most districts do it annually.
annually?
We have some that do it every other year. Just depends on preference and.
Great, thanks.
Well, I have a few questions and comments. Again, I echo everybody else's commentary about the response in general. Thank you to our community for doing so. So the 21 items, you call them, I assume that you probably have some sort of lead-in description on the question when you get to that point. Do you find that when you engage a district, like essentially you're engaging us new again, basically, and you start working with the around the district, there is some change in the way the scores change some as they come to understand those items a little bit better? I mean, a first pass with a survey is often a little challenging to get this deep into it. So when they start talking about accountability or start talking in group sessions or about empowerment and what it really means in terms of the survey, do you find the results change a little bit after that?
Yes and no. So when we do that, when we're more deliberate about the mission and vision and more deliberate about the things that you're seeing in those items, it's hard to say if people are reading that and answering differently because they're seeing it. Actually, we've tended to see the opposite, where now that you've brought that to my attention, I'm thinking about how we're communicating the mission and vision. I'm thinking about how our teams are working together, and you actually said you were going to do something about that this year, and you know what? I don't know that I'm seeing that right now. So we actually do often see either a plateau or a score go down before it goes back up again. Because you're increasing the awareness, right? You're saying, hey, everybody, this is what we're working on. And, it's like anything. When you set that goal publicly, everyone's going to say, okay, now I'm going to hold you accountable to that. So that does, we found leadership teams feel that there's kind of a kick initially to say, okay, good, that now that we've put this out there, we better actually take action and keep moving on these things. But yeah, I would say that, as people read the item, they're gonna respond based on what they're seeing.
Okay. It was mentioned earlier that, and we talked a little bit about some of the segmentation you have. Maybe this is a question for Dr. Battle. When will we see some of the segmentation out of it? The report itself is not attached to the board book. So how will we see some at least higher level segmentation?
Are you referring to race and ethnicity to generational?
Could be, but my first leap would be I'd love to see a difference between, say, the K through, our elementary schools, our secondary
so that-
schools, I assume this is not just teachers, I assume.
The departments, everybody.
Yeah, everybody, the administration, the,
Custodians, clerks, food service.
yeah,
yeah.
so I would love to see some segmentation by those different areas, because I'm guessing that interpretation of, I'm just making an assumption that interpretation of some of our values and things might be very different for someone who's working in the administration or even at the high school versus buried in an elementary on a daily, sort of level, so. So is there a follow-up for that, or is
Yeah,
more breakdown of the data? Sometimes when we get surveys, we get a lot of tables,
yeah.
maybe
We
too
could've
many of
given you
all the different ways.
25 slides
Yeah, right,
tonight.
exactly.
As you know, with data, you can go. So it's helpful for me to hear what else you're looking for.
The flip side of that is if, you get down to a level like of a building and then you and your staff come in and start talking about, well, we hear that this building scored low on employee ideas and suggestions are valued. Do you find that causes some issues in itself? Because, that's basically pointing at the principal of the building, right? Without saying it. So, does that become challenging if there's too much segmentation?
So what we usually recommend when sharing the data outward would be to kind of, just like the message goes outward, we'd want to move that data outward as well. So for example, bringing all the building leaders together and not necessarily publicly showing each individual's scores, but just giving them an understanding of here's our overall score. Here are some of the specific things that people have asked about. We do want to segment. Obviously, we don't want to publicly shame someone whose score was lower, but that segmentation also allows us to see who's doing really well, right? So if you see a particular building that has a really high communication score, they're really sharing employee ideas and getting those employee ideas, we want to know, how are you going about doing that so that we can, do some kind of peer-to-peer support and make sure that everybody's doing that. So the short answer is really, we do want to look at those because if there is a low score somewhere, we want to be able to remedy that. But we also want to make sure we're going about that tactfully, right? So we're going to that building leader, and we can say, hey, it looks like your score is higher, it looks like your score is lower. Why do you think that is? But now that we've got the numbers and the information here, we're not just subjectively asking this person if they think they could do better on something. We're saying people have said this, and if we have to be able to take constructive feedback, we have to be able to be thinking about growth and improvement, and so being able to share that with them hopefully can go that route. And if we've got some of the positives on the other side of that, so if we've talked to the folks that are doing really well first, we can bring some of those ideas to the folks that are struggling a little bit, because they might know they're struggling with it and not know what to do or how to make it better. And so if we can share that with them, then we're helping them with that development, and they know that then they're better helping their staff as well.
May I ask a clarifying question on that? So just to clarify, so that deep dive, it is work that you do within the school district in the appropriate setting, regardless of whether it's a principal or a department head?
Yeah, so we share the information. We're happy to come back to meet with other groups and have conversations at different levels with different groups of folks. As far as the work that's being done, that's going to be the team, and so finding ways to kind of bring people together and have those conversations. It can really look a number of different ways.
Gotcha. And I guess just to pin in the comment is, this data seems like it could be really helpful in terms of those conversations with the building leaders, the departmental leaders that are doing well and or struggling.
Back to the 21 items, these are universal across your process with all the places you work at. So do you find that any of them diametrically conflict with each other? So if you have someone saying, they don't feel valued, but somewhere else they maybe indicate the opposite. Does that occur at all in your data set at all?
It doesn't, no. So our items are specifically grouped together within each of those focus areas. And we've done like factor analysis to make sure that those are indeed holding together and have a high reliability.
Okay.
And the fact that the reliability is so high is what gives us the ability to look at the gaps. So if we see big differences in those numbers, because the reliability is so high, those numbers really should be closer together. Therefore, if they're, accountability, for example, if that's drifting further apart on, a particular survey, it's something of note, right? So we need to take note of that and see. That's why that's kind of one of those observations. But no, everything is separate in each area so that we're not duplicating anything or certainly contradicting anything.
Okay. Well, thank you again for your time this evening. Thank you for everybody that participated in this survey. Dr. Battle, I think that you've been handed a great set of management tools to work with. So we look forward to the outcome. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Next, we will receive a READ Act update report from Amina Oftedal, Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Assessment. Welcome, Director Oftedal.
Good evening, Chair Miller, Superintendent Battle, members of the board. Thank you for letting me take some time this evening to give you an update on the implementation of the READ Act. For context, the READ Act is a groundbreaking piece of legislation that directed school districts across the state of Minnesota out of the 2023 legislature. In 2024, in the spring, there were some updates that were made to that, and all school districts across the state are in the process of implementing the READ Act, which directs us on these three particular areas related to literacy and reading instruction. The first is screening and assessment, instructional curriculum is second, and then third is professional development. Just as an update for our screening process, we do use one of the MDE-approved screeners, FastBridge, for our students. The fall screening this year, we used the FastBridge assessments for grades K through 9 this year. 9 was a new addition, and it's part of the 9th grade academy implementation is to gather early information about students in order to provide early intervention. We did screen 4,959 students this fall in reading and literacy. Overall, all of the students, we had a 51% of students meeting fall grade level benchmarks. Our next screening window, as mandated by the READ Act, will be in January. And we will again do a mid-year screening for reading and literacy for students in grades K through 9. There are some updates from the Minnesota Department of Education that came out this fall, which were some clarifications. They have added 2 additional subtests to grades 2 and 3 screening. These subtests must be administered individually, and so the teachers will now meet with each student individually to provide this additional subtest. It is part of the dyslexia screening guidelines, and so the subtest that's being added is nonsense words. I know that sounds a little counterintuitive, but it's to focus on how students are decoding and identify characteristics that may indicate dyslexia. And so the 2 additional subtests will become part of that screening. We are still waiting for guidance from the Department of Education on screening tools specifically for grades 4 through 12. Until that guidance comes forward, we'll continue on with our own district designed screening with FastBridge. This is just a quick glance at that fall screening data by grade level. The number that you're seeing there for in the graph is the percentage of students who were screened who met the fall benchmark. And then aggregate, it was 51%. The second component of the READ Act is instructional curriculum. As I have shared with the board before, we are in the process of our implementation, our multi-year implementation of foundational literacy curriculum. This year, our pre-K VPK classrooms, our preschool classrooms are all implementing the Haggerty Foundational curriculum and on phonemic awareness and oral language development. I think the really positive data that came out of the fall screening for our VPK students and the positive impact it's having on our students in order to meet those kindergarten readiness score, benchmarks really, again, strengthen our resolve to provide them with the most foundational curriculum that we possibly can. That implementation is going well. We have done the initial training for all sites, and they began actual implementation of the full curriculum this October after the MEA break. Grades 3, 4, and 5 have finished their initial training and have begun since the end of September in the implementation of grade 3, Haggerty Bridge to Reading, and grades 4 and 5, Foundational Phonics and Morphology. Grades K1 and 2 are continuing on with their second year. We did begin in October our first round of literacy coaching for those, in which our literacy coaches, our teachers on special assignment, are going into classrooms and are meeting with collaborative teams during their collaborative team time to review their formative assessment data and supporting teachers in using data walls and adjusting instruction based on student formative assessment. Professional development, I'm sure, is something that's been a heavy lift for all of our staff this year. The carry-all training is a total of 67 contact hours. Each one of the 8 modules is 5 hours of asynchronous work and then an additional 2 hours live session with a facilitator from the University of Minnesota. We are scheduled to complete Module 2 on Monday. We are super excited to have made our way through that initial kind of awkwardness of Module 1. We're starting to find a really strong rhythm of scheduled work time during the work days. Our administrators and special education supervisors are working really hard to provide the support for teachers so that they have that set aside time for the asynchronous work during their scheduled contact hours. The live session, the first one, went fairly well. We learned a lot about how to organize that and make that the best learning environment as possible for our staff, and so staff will join that Zoom from their own workspace in their sites across the district. After the 2 hours are up, we have 2 literacy coaches in each site to provide support for folks as they continue to work together to complete their post-module assessment and begin work on the next module. We do have 326 currently educators who are participating in that carry-all training. Letters for Early Childhood is a 35-hour training, and we have preschool and early childhood special education teachers who are working on that. It is 5 hours asynchronous per module, and there are 12 hours of live synchronous time, and they will complete their second module on November 11th as well. And so we're really super excited to watch them move through that particular process as they are also doing that implementation of the foundational literacy. So we have 28 educators, and so we are able to host our own session with just our staff with the vendor for the for letters, and that seems to be working out really well for our staff. So really a lot of credit goes to the facilitators in early childhood, Kim Wackel and Christy Wanzak and Caitlin Cantola, who are just doing an amazing job of supporting those early childhood educators in completing the letters for early childhood. So I really appreciate their work there. That's the latest update. Thank you.
All right. Do board members have any comments or questions? Yes.
Just curious, with 51% meeting the benchmarker for fall, was there a goal? Or is that just new and then we just kind of setting?
It's not necessarily a goal, it's just a piece of information as we are moving into our MTSS, our multi-tiered systems of support, looking at that data, and we're disaggregate that data using a variety of contexts to kind of identify root cause, where do we see strengths, where do we see challenges, and where do we need to shore up our curriculum and instruction.
Okay, cool. And then appreciate the testing about dyslexia, being dyslexic myself, so I appreciate that we do that screening. Also understanding, though, that there are other forms of learning disability, and so wondering if that is something that also gets noticed or assessed.
So the screening is really for screenings of characteristics of dyslexia. We do not identify dyslexia as, that's not within our purview. But what we do identify are characteristics in which we do have specific interventions, which can support learners who might be displaying those. We don't necessarily screen specifically for other disabilities. We leave that to the evaluation process with special education.
Got it. Thanks.
I can add to that. Director Chester, members of the board, I have begun meeting with my leadership teams at each building. So as at Burnsville High School and a teacher in the 9th grade academy, as well as the administrator assigns, that they're really looking at the data and they're seeing some needs of the special ed students. So they're actually meeting with the team. That's where they're seeing they need to differentiate a little bit more. So as Director Oftedal said, they're just digging into the data, and I'm sure when I go to the other sites, they'll share a little bit about what they're seeing and then their follow-up.
I think it's important to make a distinction. This report's about our response to the state mandated READ Act requirements. I am certain that we are doing extensively more intervention and assessment in the district. So other comments? Director Merso?
Yeah, I just have a clarifying question. Thank you, Amina, for this update. On the slide that talks about the additional subsets with the winter assessment window coming up in January, is the fast bridge and the subsets supposed to happen both in January for the K-3?
Yes, and the additional subtests are part of the fast bridge assessment.
Okay.
And so all of it is set up, it's all part of the administration within that, and so all the data is housed together for the students.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you for the update. I just have some questions on the professional development, the KRIL and the letters for early childhood, the hours that it's requiring. Is that something that's just a one-time thing? Or is this something that's going to require like annual training? I mean, does it specify it in the READ Act?
It does. It's very clear that it is a one-time certification, that we want to make sure that all teachers have this foundational base of knowledge, and then it is up to the school districts to continue to provide continuing professional development around this topic. But this intensive piece is a one-time investment for us.
Okay, so as far as the ongoing, is that something that's just up to the district then to decide what that will look like?
Yes. As a district, we'll decide based on our MTSS process, where do we see the strengths in our staff. It may be around our literacy implementation. It may be around assessment. It may be around interventions. It just has to do with whatever part of our program needs the most attention.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Director Hume?
I have a follow-up question to what she just asked. So you said it's a one-time training for staff. A year from now, 2 years from now, is it still required for newly hired staff?
Right, so this is, the READ Act really has a 3-year implementation for the professional development, and school districts are responsible for providing this professional development over the next 3 years for all staff. So any new staff that will be coming in, we have a process for staff next year, which will include new staff as well as our Phase 2 staff, and then we have a 3rd year in which we as a district are responsible for that. After that, we should be receiving teachers coming to us from their teacher preparation programs with that background and knowledge embedded, because that was also part of the READ Act.
If they went to school in Minnesota, I would
That
guess.
is correct. And so we'll continue to monitor those particular pieces. But the other component of the READ Act is the establishment of the regional literacy networks. And so that is a regional resource network. And so, for example, training for non-licensed staff will come from the regional network, not from school districts. And so the responsibility of providing and administering the training will then shift from school districts to the regional literacy networks.
Got it. Thank you.
Additional questions or comments? I had just one, I have something going back to the chart, what is it, slide 4, the benchmarking. 3 data points is, I hesitate to call a pattern, but I do notice that the K through second is 10 points lower than the average. Do you have any, would it be purely subjective for me to ask you your thoughts on that?
I think for kindergarten, it's really clear that these are students who come to us from a lot of different places, and so it may or may not be that they've been part of our system. And so that's why when we looked at the world's best workforce data, I tried to draw the distinction between the students who had been part of our own VPK process versus students who came to us from somewhere else. The other piece of data that I really want to draw your attention to is the big jump for grade 3. And what that means is that students who may come to us not prepared to read, by the time we get them to grade 3, we've made significant progress. I would think that the more intensive development of our foundational literacy programs, we should be able to see more of a jump between that K and 2 as well. Or between the first and second grade as well.
Well, one thing, I mean, again, I would assume that a benchmark, they've taken into account some of the factors, such as, kindergartners may or may not read at a certain level, but maybe not. Maybe they haven't done it adequately. Are you telling me that the cohort group at currently grade 3, were they significantly lower at grade 2 last year and they've made that jump, or? Oh, really? Okay. So that's a
when you see that benchmarking,
step.
it's kind of a standard pattern that we're seeing, and then we see just like this really big pickup by grade 3 and 4.
You wouldn't then expect the grade 2 to continue at that level the current cohort, grade 2, to?
I would be optimistic and say I would like to see those scores closer to
Okay.
to see those higher, especially with the amount of work that we're doing with kindergarten and first
Really
grade.
speculative, but I would have thought maybe this is a COVID shadow hanging over the data set too a little bit. These are kids that, some of the very formative preschool time had a very different world than other kids have grown up in. So, but I don't know. We'll see, I guess, as the data plays out. Does this structure of the data match other, like the state average or other stuff?
Because this is the first year that school districts have all been using the same screener, there really isn't any comparative data for local districts. We will all report our data now using the same screeners this spring through the new Read Act local literacy plan. And so I would expect the data to come from the state with more kind of some aggregate kind of response. So that would be beneficial for all of us.
Okay, thank you for your report. Let's see, next we're going to receive a report from Miriam Brandi, a student board representative. Welcome.
Thank you. So we have a lot of exciting things to report for November. I'm going to start off with one of our affinity groups. The Asian Student Association is beginning to plan out and prep for their bigger events. Events to look forward to this year will be the Lunar New Year, TLC New Year, and the AAPI show. They also held a group discussion on the 6th about the Asian American identity in politics this week. Moving on to Burnsville Strong, they just began committee meetings and are prepping for second quarter. They're setting up mental health help posters in the bathroom and are putting resources together for a school-wide advisory slideshow. And then for theater, it's opening night for Burnsville High School's first show this season. Mean Girls will be playing at 7 tonight, Friday and Saturday, and then we'll resume again next Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And Saturday we'll have a matinee at 2 and another show later at 7. For youth in government, about 25 students attended Launch, which is a training event for Minnesota delegations to come together and prepare for the Youth in Government Conference in January. Some exciting news with that is that 3 of our Burnsville High School students, Kaylee Crampton, Anais Calva-Navarro, and McKinley Shannon, taught their own respective classes at this event. Moving on to athletics, for girls basketball, there was a big congrats to senior Messiah Bettis, who's been selected as one of 5 finalists for the 2024 Miss Baden Award. Also fun news is for the Blaze Cross Country. In late October, Burnsville's Carly Lamotte and Liam Merrill both placed second in the section tournament and then later had a chance to compete at state last weekend. As for other things going on at BHS, we had a school-wide mock election this past Monday for students to have the opportunity to vote for United States President, Minnesota Senate, and the House of Representatives for District 2 of Minnesota. This event was basically designed as a learning opportunity for students to understand politics and the importance of voting. And then separately, this was a really exciting thing that I myself got to participate in, is that the CIS government class students had the opportunity to help with the actual election. Burnsville High School CIS government classes worked with the city of Burnsville to give students the opportunity to election judge on November 6th. Advisors from the city came in last month to give student volunteers training on how to be an election judge. Some of our duties as election judges included handing out and explaining ballots, sorting out voter receipts, and handing out I voted stickers, which was my favorite part of that. And then moving on to my personal favorite part of this report, and the picture that you see on the screen, is the MSBA Student School Board event. 2 weeks ago, Dr. Battle and myself and my fellow student representatives attended the 3rd annual Minnesota School Board Association Student Board event at Shakopee High School. Here we were able to connect with students of similar positions to our own who are from across all of Minnesota to brainstorm and collaborate on ways to improve our home district's student representative system. We have some exciting ideas in the works, including a guidebook and workshops for future representatives, having future alternates start out as juniors to give them more time to prep for the role, having a second seat on the dais for student representatives, and incorporating a more interactive ways of engaging with the student body as a whole. And then here you can see a picture of myself, Dr. Battle, McKinley, and Shanaz. And this concludes my report.
Thank you. Well, I appreciate that very much. The next item on the agenda is to receive a report from Dr. Battle, Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Miller and members of the board. First, I would like to take this moment to celebrate and thank our community members for overwhelmingly supporting our technology levy renewal. The referendum passed with about 66% support, which means we will continue to have the funding we need to support technology, including devices, programming, support, and systems for another 10 years. We are incredibly fortunate to have such strong support from our community. It is definitely one of the things that makes me and one District 191 very proud and makes our district special. I want to thank our staff members throughout the district for sharing information with families and neighbors. Sometimes I think we take for granted that everyone knows how important technology is to our work, but it's worth being clear that it's not just putting a device in a student's hand, it's about providing access, tools, and information that students, families, and staff need, and doing it so safely and securely. So congratulations to everyone, and again, thank you. I want to share some praise for our students. In election years, high school students are given the opportunity to serve as election judges, and several, as Miriam told you, chose to do so this year. On election night, when our own Sarah Olson Dickhausen was helping city officials manage the process, they shared nothing but positive feedback about the work our students provided. So in Minnesota and in our district, we can be really proud of how smoothly and securely our elections are. And I'm especially proud of our students who helped make this happen right here in District 191. November is American Heritage Month, and I invite our entire community to join us in recognizing the history, culture, achievements, and contributions of Indigenous people. During the month, we'll share a variety of resources and information through our social feeds. One event I want to mention in particular is the American Indian Cultural Showcase, which will take place on November 21st, starting with a meal at 5:30 p.m. at Burnsville High School. This is a tremendous opportunity to learn about and experience some of the richness of Indigenous culture, including food, music, and dance, and featuring our students. So thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Now we'll receive a board member reports. Do board members have any reports they wish to share? And just a reminder that our committee and school reports are scheduled at our next board meeting.
I know it's not quite a committee report, but I wanted to share that on October 31st, so Halloween, Dr. Battle and I attended the 917's member school board and superintendent retreat. It was about a half a day long, and we convened and with our other member districts, superintendents, as well as school board members, and learned more about the partnership between 917 and the Humanities Center, because it was hosted at the Humanities Center, and the some of the services, benefits of that partnership, and the some of the programming that they do that we have participated in, and some of our team, I think.
It went to the civil rights.
The civil rights, yes. And then also, because 917 is housed mostly in Dakota County Technical College, we also had them come out and talk and share that there is I don't know, is it public? A merger between Inver Hills and Dakota County Tech, so.
They have to get legislative approval.
Yeah, they'll have to get legislative approval, but we heard about kind of how everything is like really synced and how they're gonna continue to, how they're partnering together right now in that. And then also had a nice presentation from Mentor Minnesota, realizing that it's a relation, if any student has a relationship with any one mentor, they find much more school success, as well as thinking even longer career-wise. And so that was a great report, and also had opportunity to then have small group table discussions. So.
Okay. Any other reports? Okay, then we will now move to the business portion of our meeting, beginning with our consent agenda. Although board action is required, it is generally unnecessary to hold discussion on these items. In the event a board member wishes to discuss an item, that item will be moved for separate consideration. At this time, do any board members wish to remove any items from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I will ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Director Werb,
Second?
seconded by Director Alt. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed would indicate nay. The motion carries unanimously. We'll now move into new business. First item for tonight is they're being asked to approve an application for preliminary approval of an extended field trip to Malta for the Burnsville High School Band and Music Department. Presenting tonight's recommendation will be Dr. Chris Belmont, Assistant Superintendent, Keith French, and Nick Armstrong, both BHS band teachers. Welcome to all of you.
All right, thank you, Chair Miller. Superintendent Battle, members of the board. We, as is customary and aligned to our policy and regulations around field trips, we have two of our fine educators presenting about a fascinating and exciting field trip currently earmarked for February 2026.
Yep. Hello, everyone. I'm here to just present what our plan is, if approved, to do the next music trip, the Band Travel Club, with the band, orchestra, and choir next year, 2026 in February. The plan is to go to Malta. Okay, so you're asking yourself, why Malta? How did that happen? And so what we do every year when we start to decide the trip, we work with our travel company to present 5, 6 affordable options that our kids can go on that will be safe and a great experience for them to learn about new cultures and to get to perform for people. So after they voted, we had 5 destinations. We had Norway and Italy and Ireland and New Orleans. We always include a domestic location, and Malta. And the vote came down to Malta. So that's how we ended up there. I've actually been learning about Malta. It's a fascinating place, and so I'm excited. Yeah. Any questions?
Back to you, Chair, for questions
Thank
for
you.
considering the recommendation.
Any, well, first, is there a motion to approve the recommendation to grant preliminary approval for this extended field trip?
So moved.
Moved by Director Hume,
Second?
seconded by Director Alt. Now, is there any discussion on the matter? Questions? Yes, Director Alt.
Thank you. Yeah, very interesting location. I needed to look at a map because I wasn't entirely sure where it was. So thank you for getting me to do that. Just a couple questions. Which volunteer opportunities do not require the student's parent to be present? Are there opportunities like that?
Sure. So for fundraising, you're talking
For
about?
fundraising,
Right.
yeah.
So we've done 4. Do you want to talk about fundraising?
We've had we've done 2 fundraisers so far this year that have not just required the students to work on their own. So first we did a Fundraise Genius fundraiser. And Fundraise Genius is a company that works just with music groups. And basically it's a GoFundMe type fundraiser where students built, they just created a login and uploaded a profile picture, and then we as directors provided them with pictures of our students performing and things like that. And they build a nice web page, and students enter emails of potential donors, and then those emails go out when we hit the go button on the fundraiser, and then people can either donate or not donate. So it's just a chance for people to provide cash donations, and students take home 85% of the profits, which is much higher than most brick and mortar fundraisers where you're selling items. But that being said, we did also do a Drooly Moose fundraiser that just wrapped up last week. And that brought in a good amount of money as well for students that they can use towards the trip. And then we will be starting a Pampered Chef fundraiser that was approved towards the end of this month. That one is completely online, which is really nice because students can forward to people who are interested in purchasing. And then all the goods will be delivered directly to their customers' houses, just by mail. So it doesn't require students to do a ton other than to just share it with people who might be interested. And then we're also going to sell butter braids, delicious butter braids, towards the end of January, February. So they just come as raw dough and bake them, and they are delicious. So those 4 fundraisers are fundraisers we're doing this year. And then we'll likely run a lot of those same fundraisers next year as well. All of those proceeds can go towards this trip if the students so choose.
Right. And I think you're kind of alluding to, we also do we give the students the opportunity, this place called Achieving Dreams, where they work concessions at local sporting events at the big stadiums and stuff. And that's a really lucrative one, but they do have to have a parent present to work on that one. But we want to give them as many opportunities as possible to.
That's awesome.
Whatever their best case is.
And appreciate the addition of the GoFundMe site.
Yeah, Fundraise Genius.
Be it just nice for families to be able to make that donation rather than to feel like they have to purchase something that, whether they want it or not, just give them money because that's really what the kid's looking for. And then just a question on the logistics of the travel. It seems kind of unusual to have them fly out of Minneapolis and then land in Chicago when they come back and have a coach ride home. Can you elaborate on how that happened?
As far as I understand it, it's just that's where the plane goes on that day. The closest one is Chicago to get us home. So it will include, the kids did know that when they voted on it. So this isn't a surprise, going to be a big surprise to them. But so we'll be flying back into Chicago and then busing home.
Well, glad they knew about that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yep, he was talked a lot about that.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I appreciate the detail for this trip. It was very detailed, so I appreciate that. And then, what's my other question? Oh, so the fundraisers that you mentioned, they're like group fundraisers, so you would just split the money, and then they also have fundraisers that they do individually?
So our fundraisers, for all of our students, we always, the money that goes into our band student activities account. And then we've been tracking it with a system previously called Charms, but Charms has now changed to Cut Time. So we're using a management tracker to track the funds that each student earns. So when I got the detailed report of Fundraiser Genius, we got one kind of blanket check for the music program, but then we went into Fundraise Genius and added that to each student's individual student accounts.
So when we do a fundraiser, the money goes directly back to the students to use for their whatever they would like to use that for. And they don't have to use it for a trip. They could also use it for their a marching band fee or something, so, or to buy reeds or whatever they need. So, so while a lot of students do use their money for their trip, some students use that money for a winter drumline fee, or they're going to buy their reeds with that, or so.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So this sounds like a great trip. Because I think it's every 2 years the band goes, right? And because so the frequency is a little infrequent, and there's been a little confusion in the past. I think the point about the fundraising, we want to make sure, and this isn't just for you guys, it's in general statement, this board is adamant in the support of these kind of trips. We believe they're highly educational and an excellent experience for the students, but it is an underlining requirement for this to continue in the future that every student, when we do this, every student has the opportunity to fundraise their way onto the trip, and that they don't need to come out of pocket, and that makes sure that no matter what background they come from, they're able to go on this trip with their fellow classmates. So I just want to be very clear about that. We trust you guys know and understand that, and we'll drive towards that purpose. So.
And we love that. We're always working towards that, and we do have several students that will fundraise their way onto the trip.
Good, excellent. Yep. Well, thank you very much. Oh, we have to take the vote, don't we? Having had that discussion, all those in favor for the motion in front of us indicate so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next we're being asked to adopt a resolution to accept donations. Presenting this resolution will be Superintendent Dr. Battle.
Thank you, Chair Miller, and members of the board. I want to first to say thank you to the many community organizations and partners that support education at ISD 191. I am so grateful for their support and generosity. Included in this quarter's donation report, you will find many ways our community partners support us: donation of fresh produce from Cub Foods, school supplies from Prince of Peace Church, nearly 1,000 backpacks and school supplies from Costco and Toyota Kids in Need Foundation, school supplies from the Lions Club, Burnsville Women of Today, DigiKey, and community members. Donations to food and nutrition services from former students and staff. It is my recommendation that the Board of Education adopt a resolution to approve and accept these donations to our district in accordance with our school board policy and Minnesota statutes, and to permit their use as designated by the donors.
Is there a motion to adopt the resolution to accept donations as presented?
So moved.
Was that Director Musso? Yeah. And seconded. Any discussion on the matter? Seconded by Director Chester. Sorry, you didn't hear me. Any discussion on the matter?
I just had a question.
Yes. Sure.
So at the bottom, it says total donations, $254.55, but looking above that, it obviously is more than that. So that's just the cash donation. So we don't include a monetary value for the 400 backpacks or the
Right.
$500
It's just the
Costco
cash.
gift card, or, that's just the
It's
cash donation.
So we can probably put that at cash total donations.
Okay, any other?
Decide value on any kind you have to.
Well, again, on behalf of the board, thank you to our entire community for the support it provides us continuously. Having been moved and seconded, this resolution will require a roll call vote. So in just a second, I will ask Sarah to call the roll, and when she calls your name, please respond with either an aye if they are in favor, or a nay if you're opposed. Sarah, will you please make the roll call?
Director Hume?
Aye.
Director Chester?
Aye.
Director Connor?
Aye.
Chair Miller?
Aye.
Director Burb?
Aye.
Director Marcel?
Aye.
And Director Alt?
Aye.
This resolution was declared duly passed and adopted. Next, we're going to be asked to approve the Minnesota State High School League Foundation Grant A. The recommendation will be presented by Dr. Chris Belmont, Assistant Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Miller. In partnership and with the guidance of Athletic Director Kleiner, presenting to you this Foundation Grant A application for the Minnesota State High School League. This is something that we typically do present to the board annually. It seeks to provide the opportunity for more students in the Minnesota State High School League and in our school district to be able to participate through this grant. These grants are an excellent way to recognize the value of student participation and how its extracurricular activities are connected to thriving academics. So my recommendation is that the Board of Education approve the ISD 191 application to the Minnesota State High School League Foundation Grant A to offset student activity fees.
Is there a motion to approve the Minnesota State High School League Foundation Grant?
So moved.
Moved by Director Werb,
Second.
seconded by Director Connor. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Next up on the agenda, we're being asked to approve on a first reading basis changes to policies 516, student medication, 521, student disability non-discrimination, 535, service animals in school, and 608, instructional services, special education. Presenting this recommendation will be Amy Pachowski, Director of Student Support Services. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Miller, Dr. Battle, and members of the board. I am here to bring forward to the first reading basis changes to policies 516, which adds new statutory provisions and rearranges sections for clarity. Policy 521, that updates the statutory definition of the disability. Policy 535, service animals in the school, it adds protections to persons with disabilities. And Policy 608, instructional services for special education. This adds child with disability provisions and also some evaluation standards that were completed by the legislation. These policies were reviewed by the Policy Review Committee on October 22nd, 2024.
Is there a motion to approve these policies?
So moved.
By Director Hume,
Second.
seconded by Director Chester. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. In our final item under new business, we are being asked to approve on a first reading basis changes to policy 532, use of peace officers and crisis teams to remove students with IEPs from school grounds. Assistant Superintendent Dr. Belmont will be presenting this recommendation. Welcome back, Dr. Belmont.
Thank you, Chair. Policy 532, use of peace officers and crisis teams to remove students with IEPs from school grounds. This is a change to policy that is in response. We've had several changes to policy in response to the 2023 legislative session with specific language around school resource officers. This policy was reviewed and recommended in partnership with Director Piotrowski as well as our school staff, and then presented to the Policy Review Committee meeting on October 22nd. Yes, sending it back to you.
Is there a motion to approve changes to policy 532?
So moved.
Moved by Director Connor,
Second.
seconded by Director Werb. Is there any discussion on the matter? I'll just acknowledge this is the end of a long road. Appreciate to be there.
Thank you.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. This concludes the business portion of our meeting tonight. Up next on our agenda is a couple work sessions to discuss long-range facility planning and the audit report. Before starting this work session, I move we take a brief recess and return to the dais at 8:20 to begin our work session. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved by myself and seconded, I'm sorry, was that all? Yes, sir. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries unanimously. Please return to the dais at 8:20.
I think that whole table's inside.
Back, everyone. The final item on our agenda is to hold a work session to discuss long-range facility planning and one on the audit report. I will now turn it over to Superintendent Battle to start things off.
Thank you, Chair Miller. So tonight, I'd like to first ground us in why this discussion now. So recently, we had a closed session on safety and security, a work session to discuss the use of open facility sales proceeds. Just to refresh everyone's memory about the DEC outlot sold on September 30th. Metcalf Middle and Sioux Trail Elementary schools are anticipated closing July 2025. We really need to take a planful, comprehensive approach to addressing these and other facilities' needs. Going back to 2019-20, we had set our purpose and commitment for open facilities. And so the next two slides are really just a repeat of that commitment. So wanting feedback from the board, is this still our purpose and our commitment? Identifying prioritized needs for today that will provide flexibility for the future, leverage and maximize our uses of funding to address the use and efficacy of our 191 facilities. And then the commitments on the next slide are ones that we have had throughout the open facilities process. The next slide, safety and facility updates. So Dave Lake primarily has been hearing from staff, and we've also heard from parents of initial list of identified safety and facility updates. Some of them are structural to the front entrances to make them more welcoming and secure. We still have open concept buildings, so improvements. Dave will tell you, as you have seen, we have some redesign of parking lot and parking, especially at Burnsville High School. That was done last year, and parent pickup zones. We like to continue that at other sites. Early childhood, dedicated spaces for instruction, secure entrances, and the enterprise infrastructure. On the next pages, I'll give you a little bit more detail about the list. So the structural changes, as I mentioned, to be welcoming, to look at traffic flow, regulate the environment, have multiple layers for security, our vision throughout our buildings, communication, and then efficiency, reduce the need for multiple dedicated personnel. There's some ways technology can really help us with that efficiency. The next one is open concept buildings. So we really need to evaluate for return on investment. Dave it might have been the 50s when that was the big school architecture. It was open buildings, but we have so many different needs and changes. So we have some buildings with 3/4 walls, so to install floor-to-ceiling walls, adding classroom doors in buildings. The next slide gives a little bit more about, is that a same one? Oh, the pickup zones, I'm sorry. The site student pickup zones were never designed for the level of traffic that we are experiencing. Some of you who have been in those lines understand. So safety, this is why safety and security, separation of zones, improved vision, clear permanent markings and signage, and to reduce the need for multiple dedicated personnel to direct traffic and set up. Enterprise was the last one on the list. The secure entrances for early childhood 8 buildings. Before the enterprise is the early childhood. So voluntary pre-K and Project Kids programs are available at all elementary buildings. Our program hours do not align with the K-5 programming. And we need to provide appropriate instructional spaces, including primary age bathrooms for these programs with dedicated secure entrances. And the last one is enterprise. Security cameras, communication, and next generation flexibility. Other needs we have received, some of which you've had presentations from parent groups or booster groups about. One we're hearing is Mirage Center upgrades. So our theater, as well as our band and orchestra teachers, have identified some areas for upgrades. The athletic field upgrades, most notably our baseball and softball field. You heard, is it 2 years now since we heard from the boosters? And then the pathway programming at Burnsville High School, future enrollment and instructional capacity, and there's dated infrastructure and inefficiencies. So Dave Lake is going to share how we do projects now, and then I'd like your feedback on some my proposal for next steps to go forward. And then Dave is here to answer any specific questions you have about all that he's been getting from staff and about several of these facilities. So Dave.
Good evening, Board Chair Miller, Directors, and Superintendent Battle. So I want to answer the question, how do we do projects now? The majority of projects are planned up to 10 years in advance, which is long-term facilities maintenance. MDE allows several uses for long-term facilities maintenance. First, deferred capital expenditures and maintenance projects necessary to prevent further erosion to facilities. Second, increasing accessibility of school facilities. Third, health and safety capital projects. Or fourth, by board resolution, to transfer money from the general fund reserve for long-term facility maintenance to the debt redemption fund to pay the amounts needed to meet debt on general bonds. As you are well aware, some projects are unexpected. Those could be due to enrollment shifts. Enrollment shifts typically entail classroom and space updates. Special needs. Our job is to serve the ever-changing needs of our students. ADA compliance or restroom accessibility for students with disabilities are two common examples. Breakdowns and malfunctions. Mechanical repairs are ongoing with over 2 million square feet of properties in the district. Examples would include HVAC, plumbing, roofing, mechanical, boilers, water heaters, and I could go on all night listing more. Another example would be changing programming pressures. Student programming does shift at the elementary and secondary levels from time to time. Our board members and district leadership are proactive in addressing the needs of our students. When applicable, we do utilize LTFM funds for these changes. Some major projects are outside the scope of long-term facilities maintenance, such as significant structural changes which take additional steps in development. There are several allowable sources of funding at play here. We pay for the different projects through long-term facility maintenance, which we just discussed. I consider that a semi-flexible 10-year adjustable plan to replace and repair structural and some capital expenses. Capital expenses defined in this conversation refer to projects that exceed $10,000. These items may also include new roofs, boilers, flooring, HVAC, plumbing, mechanical. Another option is the annual operations department budget. This includes, but is not limited to, maintenance repairs, general supplies, equipment, cleaning supplies, and smaller site improvements like painting, roller shades, new marker boards, things of that nature. We can also fund some projects through Safe Schools. Safe Schools is in place to equip school facilities for improvements related to violence prevention and facility security for qualifying school buildings. Security cameras would be an appropriate use of this fund. Special education primarily focuses on classrooms, programming, and accessibility for students with specific needs. Next, reassigned unassigned funds. As Dr. Battle mentioned, with recent board sessions on safety and security, along with discussions on how to use the sale proceeds from Diamond Head, Metcalf Middle, and Sioux Trail Elementary, reassigning unassigned funds provides an opportunity to address some of our pressing facilities needs. Lastly, bond referendums. Bond referendums are one of several financing options for school construction projects. School districts with voter approval may issue general obligation funds to finance school construction projects. This includes new schools, school additions, renovations, related equipment and software, technology infrastructure, energy improvements, and staff planning and development. In many instances, bond referendums and unassigned funds provide the largest opportunity for long-range facilities planning to meet student needs, programming, safety and security in an efficient, welcoming manner that provides future flexibility. Thank you.
And so I am recommending that in the next 3 to 4 months that I gather more information, so a much thorough vetting process. So for example, you had one group for athletic fields to present their proposal. I think we need to look at the other needs, athletic, as well as in these other areas to get more information from the parents of early learning, do a deeper dive. And then based on that information, then develop the guiding change to identify the essential questions, and then a process to explore the priorities, the options, desired outcomes, and then bring back to the board my recommendations for the priority projects. It may be a 3 to 5 year, some suggestions of where would seem most likely we should fund things. For example, security cameras probably should come from safe schools, but really for the board then to give us direction of how you want to prioritize, and then the funding options.
Okay, thank you. It's a workshop, so we'll let our hair down a little bit here in a minute, but I suggest, given there isn't like a burning question in front of us tonight, I suggest kind of 3 parts. One, any questions we have about, facility planning, since we have Mr. Lake, who's tolerated the whole entire evening to sit here for us, so let's take advantage of it. I then suggest that we weigh in a little bit on the proposed process that Dr. Battles brought forward. And then finally, just, I guess, any thoughts initially on, but I mean, I think that might be, the last part might be a little bit premature at this moment, simply because we need her to bring forward, or you need her to bring forward information in the coming months for you, but that's just my suggestion how we handle tonight's conversation, but, so I open it up to that.
I think that's a great way to structure the conversation.
Okay.
I agree.
Well, then let's go. Questions? How do we feel about Dr. Battle's proposed process?
I think it sounds like a good strategy moving forward.
I appreciate, obviously there were a lot of things listed as things that could be included. So I appreciate the process that you've outlined, and obviously it will be a pretty big project to determine what are the most pressing needs and when can and should we do them, and how are we going to pay for them. So it seems like the process you've outlined will get us to a point where you will have a recommendation that you can bring to us and we can discuss at some future date, probably not too far in the future, but yeah, so I think you're on the right track.
And the 3 to 4 months is aligned to the budget process, and
Sure.
as you know, your next presentation is the audit of last year. And so that aligns to the process to really prep us to have this same conversation as you're finding what the
part of the
government
budget planning
legislature will
process.
do, and
Right.
you'll know where we are with the audit. And
I just, when I saw this on the agenda, I started thinking about, okay, we're looking forward. We also have to know where we've been. And I went back to the Baker-Tilly report that was commissioned by then Superintendent Amoroso, and then Dr. Battle, you moved that forward. And I also remembered, Scott, in a previous conversation, you had mentioned, making sure that we're judicious about where we invest our money in terms of student need / demand. And so kind of taking a step back, I think part of this process needs to start with a holistic view of enrollment, to kind of take a temperature of the water in terms of space usage, class sizes, given that the audit is going to tell us that leadership acknowledges that we should expect enrollment to continue to decline for the foreseeable future. I would feel a whole lot better if we get a read by building, and I'm not going to bore everybody. I have, of course, a list of questions. I'm not going to bore everybody with those right now, but basically confirming that, that our investment will not end up with a building that eventually is going to close. The last thing that our community and taxpayers want to see is to have that happen. So I think, it has to do with not just enrollment, as I said, but also, and Baker Tilly kind of gives us, the Baker Tilly report gives us kind of a general space in which to evaluate, square footage by student, for one, right? And as I said, Dr. Battle, I will share out my questions, but that needs to be the start so that we really know, yep, we are really on solid ground with the elementaries in particular, because obviously the middle schools and the high schools are not going to go anywhere. But particularly in the elementaries, that we're going to be, good going forward.
Thank you for that. And as you know, the legislature gave us additional VPK seats. So as we're moving more of them into the building, that looking at the space and what the projected enrollment is for VPK. That will give us kind of future trends. But as you know, all the districts in Minnesota are expecting a decline pretty much because there just aren't enough replacement births.
It's nationwide.
It's
nationwide.
so,
nationwide.
Yes, okay.
I was thinking the same thing that you just brought up, that, if we lose the equivalent of half an elementary school in terms of our enrollment numbers every 1 to 2 years, it's been almost 5 years since we last had that conversation. So at some point, we may need to revisit that conversation, and maybe we decide we're good and we don't want to make any changes. But I think we probably need to consider that conversation as part of this, because you're right, I wouldn't want to spend $1 million on a building and then close it 2 or 3 years later.
And it makes your job a little more challenging over time, right? Because we need to be equitable with our investments in the schools.
Right.
And whatever it is that we're doing, cameras as an example, right? We put them, make sure within a certain time frame, our schools are going to get those. So.
My question though for that particular thought is it feasible to be able to predict what particular building we would have to look at closing and say we're not going to put dollars into that particular school? I don't think that's possible.
And it might be a chicken and egg conversation. You're right, we can't say, no, we're not going to invest in this particular school. But if we see that one school is, as with the last conversation of open facilities, if they're, if we're at a truly underutilized building status, that might shift the conversation a little bit. I don't know. We need to, the point is the data is gonna hopefully tell us that, yeah, we're good to go.
Right. It's not a binary, it's nuanced. Cameras can be moved, right?
Right.
Money spent on rebuilding a whole new gymnasium would be, probably not a wise choice. If we're closing it.
Yeah.
Or turning 3/4 walls into whole walls or whatever. But You did have a slide in here on other needs, which highlight a few things that have bubbled up from the community. Without implying that this is now please tell us what we want to, all the things we want to do. How can in order to engage the community, how can the community reach out to you if there's things not on this list that you're currently not aware that there are people that are actively interested in the future?
I think we were quite successful when we had our parent and community meetings at the 3 middle schools. So I'm thinking that's a similar process where we open it up to the community and have focus groups. So I think there was a question about what other projects are we, it was a question, I think, about prioritizing. How do we know what to do first? What are we putting aside first? How do you get to that? What comes first?
So then I would.
So yeah, I look at that, invite the community, because as you know, the community uses a lot of spaces through our facilities rental. They may have some ideals that we may not get from our staff who's there in the day. There may be some things that people at night are seeing.
Since this is going to come in the shadow of an influx of cash, I would suggest that those sessions be phrased as, we're not looking to go how we can spend all this money next year, but rather this is part of an ongoing circular process of development in the community, and what is it that we can, what is it they would like to see added to our facilities planning. So.
I think that's a great idea, to the focus groups, because that can serve as informative too for people that may feel like some buildings get more improvements done than the others and stuff like that, to kind of maybe tell them the why and the needs for some of the projects of the past, just to be transparent too, so.
I do have a question about things that we already have that we are slated to be paying for to fix or update that are already allocated from whatever, long-term facilities money we have, to separate and to say, well, we're already allocating this money. We don't need to put this, we don't need to put it towards the money that we're trying to choose what to do with right now. You know what I mean?
Yep, and that's a great question, and I appreciate the thoughts here, because I think we're all on the same page here. We don't want to put money into a building that maybe down the road ends up getting closed. And I will say that I see the same enrollment numbers that you see, and I factor that in as I adjust the long-term facility maintenance dollars. Most recently, 2 years ago, we replaced the boilers at William Byrne. William Byrne, that was a building that I'm well aware that we added on to. It's got, I don't know the exact numbers, but 550 for students, something in that range. And then we have other buildings that maybe have a couple hundred students less. So would I look at that a little different? I certainly wouldn't hesitate to do something that the building needs, but I may ask, our executive team, okay, we're getting close to having this need for this building. How do we proceed, or do we need to involve the board into that conversation? So I would agree wholeheartedly on the line of thought there.
I'd also caution it though, because I think anything that's we're going to earmark maybe that school to close could send community panic.
Oh, absolutely.
Too, and it's so you don't want to invest in my school? What's wrong with this school? So I wouldn't want to make an assumption that any particular school is being eyeballed, to consider that, and being very careful about that, because declining enrollment isn't just one particular building, it's across the district. Sure. And so just because, so it's really kind of going through the process the last time, it's really a puzzle. Right. To make that determination.
And also variances and open enrolled in, right? So we've got our enrollment and the space usage.
Yep.
How are we doing with managing our variances and our open enrollment so that building use is optimized?
Right.
That could be another thing that could help.
Yeah.
Okay, any additional thoughts? You have, looks like some affirmation to your plans. Okay,
Okay, thanks.
thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Hanging around with us, Dave.
Absolutely.
All the requests.
We'll now pivot to the second half of our work session tonight, around the audit report. I don't have introductions on my sheet here. You-
Yeah, Nancy, Tyler Dean, and Nancy.
Tyler, I recognize. Nancy, I believe it's Nancy Schultzenberg. Is that- Sorry.
From
With
Creative
Bergen
Planning.
KDV.
Sorry
Welcome.
about that.
Good evening, Chair Miller, Dr. Battle, members of the board. First, I want to thank Nancy and the Bergen KDV team, as well as our finance team for another successful audit. And then second, or with that, I'll just let Nancy go through the presentation.
All right, thanks, Tyler. Good evening, members of the board and administration. I'm happy to be able to present these results to you this evening. So I want to start out the discussion tonight talking about the communications that we issue as part of the audit. And first and foremost, and most importantly, is the independent auditor's report. And if you would like to read this in its entirety, it is in the front of the financial statement document. But in summary, what we're issuing is an unmodified opinion, which is the best that we can offer, indicates that based on our audit, the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects. So that letter does talk about responsibilities and other levels of assurances provided, but that is the key, that it is an unmodified opinion. And then in addition to that, we have some compliance reports that we issue, and the first one relates to government auditing standards. And those are the standards that we're required to follow because you're a school district in the state of Minnesota. So they require us as auditors to look closer at internal control and also compliance with laws, regulations, contracts, grants, other matters. And based on that, we had no internal control findings and we did not note any non-compliance. So a really unusual situation. We usually have at least lack of segregation of accounting duties, but your finance department has done a really good job of segregating where they can and adding mitigating controls when there is some overlap. So congratulations on that. And then we had a report on compliance in accordance with uniform guidance. So this relates to the federal program money that you receive. And we did test your education stabilization funds and also your federal special education funds this year. We do that on a rotating basis for the larger programs that you participate in, and they are required to be tested once every 3 years. So that's how we landed on the 2 that we tested this year. And based on that, we're issuing an unmodified opinion on compliance and also no internal control findings as it relates to that compliance. And then finally, the last official letter is our report on Minnesota legal compliance. And this comes to us directly from the Office of the State Auditor. They're very specific as far as the statutes that they ask us to test as they relate to accounting matters. And there as well, we did not have any findings, so no non-compliance noted. So all clean reports when it comes to compliance and internal control. And those are all housed in that separate document that you received, the third of the 3. And then we have the communication letter, which is a document in itself. And in there, we have several pages that are titled Required Communication. So those are all the things that our standards say that we need to present to you as the governing board for the district. And would be our tool if there was anything significant that we uncovered, if we had any disagreements with management, any difficulties encountered. Happy to report that none of it strays from our standard language. So clean bill of health, if you will. Then we have financial analysis, which I will cover tonight. And then in the back of that document, there's a little light reading, some legislative updates from the last session, and then also the most exciting part, new GASB standards. So the Government Accounting Standards Board is always busy, and so there are 3 new standards that will be implemented in the next several years that you'll find a summary of in the back of that document. Any questions on those communications? All right, then moving to the financial information, general education aid is still your largest funding source for your general fund. So we take a look at the components of the calculation of that general education aid, starting with the basic formula allowance. So what we're presenting here is a 10-year history, and then looking forward to 2025. I think the highlight on this chart is the 4% increase that you did receive for 2024. So nice to see that number a little bit higher than it had been in the past, and going back down to 2% for 2025. And then the other part of the calculation has everything to do with your students. So we have a lot of charts and graphs to take a look at those numbers and give you a 5-year historical perspective. So starting with your residents is what we see on this chart. And overall, like you discussed earlier, declining enrollment, declining population, in both ways. So when we look at this, you can see that in 2024 versus 2023, you're down about 48 students. So not a significant change in those 2 years, about less than 1%. But if we look back 5 years, you're down about 365 students, or 3.5%. And this graph is the same information in graphical format. We all see things a little bit differently, so nice to present it in 2 ways. And this does segregate by level. So you can see on the top there we have your secondary, pretty significant decline there. That's probably the biggest area of decline. In the middle, your elementary, very stable. When you look at 4620 in 2024 versus 4625 back in 2020. And then on the bottom you have your kindergarten and other, also very stable over the 5 years.
Just to clarify as you're flying, these numbers are residential numbers,
Residents.
not attending numbers.
Right. So those are the students that live within your boundaries that are attending a public school.
May or may not be attending our schools.
Right, but a public school. So the non-public students are not included in
Okay,
those
that's
numbers at all.
important, yeah. Yep.
All right, so then to actually calculate general education aid, we take those residents, weight them by grade level, which is what the top portion of this chart is showing you, and then factor in that open enrollment. And that's where the biggest changes that you're seeing are coming in. So the top line of the chart are your residents, so you can see that overall decline, and then we have pupil unit gains and pupil unit losses. The good news is that your gain has been increasing, but unfortunately the loss has also been increasing at a higher rate. So the net loss in 2023 was 2766, and that increased to 2948 in 2024. So that does drive a lower number and a bigger decrease, so about 3.2% since 2023 and 10.8% in the 5 years that you're looking at. And then similar information, again, in a graphical format showing that overall decline in students served. Moving then to some actual dollar amounts, starting with your general fund sources of revenue. So revenues were up in 2024, about 16.4%, or $23.3 million. So a sizable increase there. And I think you can see a little bit easier in the graph showing that large jump up. So on the top in that brown is your other category. That is federal and local sources. So you can see back in 2020, before ESSER funds, before those education stabilization and the COVID money, that number was much smaller. So what you're seeing in 2022 and through 2024 most substantially are those COVID monies. In the middle there is the state sources. That makes up almost 65% of the total revenues, and that's where you saw the largest increase. So that number was up over $15 million for 2024. A couple of things contributing most significantly to that are the special education cross-subsidy increase that you saw, which is a nice change for 2024, and then also the increase in the compensatory funds with your general education aid. So those two pieces, along with some other miscellaneous new revenues, contributed to that increase. And then on the bottom is the local property tax category, and that did increase this year about $7.9 million with the increase in the levy in the general fund for 2024, which is the Pay 23 levy. All right, then taking a look at budget to actual. So when we look at original budget, you had anticipated $2.8 million increase in your fund balance. You did modify that, increasing that expected positive variance to $6.6 million, and you ended the year increasing your fund balance by $16.3 million. And when we look at the reasons for that, you can see them in the far right category, the far right column. Revenues were over budget by 3.4%. So not really a sizable variance when you're looking at $160 million in a budget. Two categories that had some variances. First of all, your local and county revenues. Biggest driver in that variance is your investment earnings. So last year, there were some unrecognized losses. This year, the market conditions were better at June 30th, so you had some increases and some unexpected money there. It's really hard to predict what we're going to see in the market, so conservative budgeting is a safe way to go. And then the other category is your state sources, budgeting conservatively for that special education category, which did exceed anticipated amounts. And then if we look at your expenditures, those were under budget, so also positive variance there, but that was 2.8%. So again, a very small variance when you're looking at that size of budget. And really only two categories that show some sizable differences. First of all, your regular instruction, under budget about 4.5 million, related to primarily open positions and just some conservative budgeting. And then the pupil support services, that actually was over budget by about $1 million, related to increased transportation costs. All right, then moving to some pie charts to take a look at where you're spending your money in the general fund. So we have two pie charts, and you can see that the picture of them looks virtually the same. So your spending categories were very consistent from year to year, and the amount spent on direct instruction around 62% for each of those years. So consistent there as well. Overall, expenditures were up about 11.9 million, so a little less than the revenues. That's about an 8.7%, and most of that came in the way of salaries and benefits. That is your largest expenditure category, so it would make sense that that's what's driving the increase in expenditures. All right, next several charts and graphs take a look at your revenues and expenditures per student, and then we also have some comparatives to the statewide averages. So what you see on this slide includes all of the funds, and when you look at 2023, which is the last year we have comparatives, you can see that Burnsville is over statewide averages, which is consistently what you've been seeing. If we look at 2024, those numbers were up, with the increase in the expenditures along with the decrease in the students served. So kind of a double effect on that change. And this chart is a graph that just shows the general fund and then compares it to the state average. And here again, you can see that you've been consistently above. So you're moving at in the same direction that the state is moving at, just a higher level. And the big jump up in 2024, we have been seeing those significant increases across the board. So I anticipate that that average will also be going up. And then expenditures, a very similar picture. You're not going to spend what you don't receive. So again, above state averages and an increase for 2024. And then with the same information in the graphical format. All right. Next slide, we take a look high level at the general fund financial position. So charting your cash and investments and your total fund balance. I think what's good about this one is that you've been experiencing challenges with enrollment, but you've still been able to steadily and slowly increase that fund balance, which is on the bottom there. So going from 20.3 million in 2020 up to 53.7 in 2024. Cash is above that, and the variance between your cash and fund balances are going to be those receivables and payables that happen at year end. We pull all that information together to give you a chart that takes a look at the general fund operations. We talked about the increase in revenues and expenditures and that increase in fund balance. And I think the positive to take away from the top portion of this chart is that overall excess revenues each year, allowing you to build on the fund balance, which is on the bottom. So we have segregated all of the restricted categories as mandated by the state. There is a committed amount that you have set aside, and then your unassigned number increased about 14 million for this year and is about 24.6% of your expenditures at year end. Moving then to the food service fund, this fund had a really good year. So the state of Minnesota implemented free meals for all the students. So you had a almost 22% increase in your revenues. Costs were up about 18%, so that allowed you to increase the fund balance in this fund as well. So you're sitting at the end of the year at just under 4.2 million. So something to continue to look at and see how we can improve those programs with some capital items or however you want to spend that money. I think the state of Minnesota took away their letters that they would send when your fund balance was getting a little high in this fund, but I think they're bringing those back next year. They have increased to 6 months is what they were looking at. We'll have to see what that recommendation is going forward. That's something to keep an eye on. And then finally, your community service fund. Revenues up about 6.3%, expenditures up about 3.8%, so healthy increase in your fund balance here as well. Increased programming was the biggest driver in the changes here. When we look at all of the categories of your fund balance, those are all positive as well, and that is not always what we see. Some districts have struggles in maintaining those as a positive in each of the categories, especially when we look at ECFE school readiness and those programs. And that is everything I have. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Before we do questions, I had a thought as we were looking at this. We have 2 new board members who will join in January. Can we make sure Sarah gets copies of these for them?
Mm-hmm.
And then probably, if they can figure it out, I'm thinking, sorry, I'm going to do this, Tyler. It'd be good to meet him and go through the information in this presentation. I'm sure they'll have their
Very
eye
complex Minnesota finance.
go big for a little while, but you can
School
walk them slowly
finance
through
things I need to
it.
get
There's
up
some
to
great
speed
stuff
on.
in here about
Yes.
pupils count and expenditures and stuff. That's all wrapped up in one report, so be a great starting point for them. So.
Phase 1 and 2.
Okay. Questions for our auditor or Tyler? Yep, go ahead.
Well, it was towards the end, but the food service fund balance is not something we talk about very often. I'd like to better understand, like, what is that typically used for? And having a $4 million fund balance seems like a lot to me for that.
Yeah, so I think if you look back to 2020, that $1 million that you had in your fund balance is more typical with what we've seen in history. COVID and the increased rates from the federal government increased the fund balances for 2021, 2022. 2023 was more of a typical year, and then now this year with the state funding, that increase went up again. Those funds are very restricted as far as what you can use them for. There was a little bit of expansion recently on some things, so cafeteria tables, those types of things. But otherwise, really just operating the food service program is what you can spend that money on. So new kitchen appliances, those types of things, but not your cafeterias typically. So that's new, that you can use it for cafeteria tables and some other things. So I don't know, Tyler, you probably have more to say on that.
Yeah, so it used to be, you could only have 3 months of operating expenses. COVID, they changed that to 6 months. We're right around that 6 months after 2024, so we're looking at different ways to spend that. Most notably, some capital improvements to some equipment, the kitchen equipment. I mean, that's about the quickest and easiest way to spend that. I know, like, Julie has a lot of troubles filling positions. You know, that's another area where we come in a little bit under budget because positions don't get filled. So staffing is another area that, you know, if you could fill some positions, that would be helpful. But some kitchen, you know, the cafeteria tables would be an upgrade. And that's a new expense that I think just started for fiscal year 25
Yes.
that districts can use. So that would be a nice upgrade for, you know, it would look good for the, you know, the community and the students to use, and that was not typically allowed, so that's a new way we can use that. But it's going to be kitchen equipment is going to have to be kind of what we look at.
So that money is not used for actual food supplies or meals, is that correct?
The
It is also-
operating
it also
food
includes
service.
that.
Yep, it's food preparation of the food, staffing the food service department, all of that. Yeah.
And when you refer to restrictions and such, who is setting, is the state restrictions on that money?
It's mostly a federal
Right.
program, so it is.
Right.
It's restricted that way. So like we can't spend money on utilities. We can't pay for operations staff to clean kitchens or clean the cafeterias because that's a general fund expense. So it's restricted in that way. It has to be for really meal prep, food, supplies, that kind of thing.
Right, and this year is so different. I mean, you had increased food costs, obviously with inflation, those increased food costs, but the increase in the amount of money that came from the state of Minnesota was higher. So it covered all of that and more.
I've been meaning to ask about that. So the increase, the money that came from the, getting off tangent, but came from state actually was an increase over what we would have received had we been charging for meals? Is that what I'm hearing?
I mean, that's what we're seeing from an audit
Interesting.
perspective, but I haven't looked into the details.
Yep.
And then you still probably are having à la carte that students are paying for.
Yep, à la carte is still an option.
Yeah.
Yep.
I had a question about the communication letter. Looking back at FY '23, the audit included first 3 significant risks.
Oh.
And this year's audit added, looks like 1 or 2 more.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
I can. So when we sit down and plan an audit, we need to address risk, and we need to determine where risk could be. So we have 2 things that are always required to be considered: management override of controls and revenue recognition. So in each and every audit that we do for whatever type of entity, those 2 things are always considered. Misappropriation of assets, just by nature, is included in most of them. So 2 years ago, we were required to start putting in the communication letter and the communication to you as the board and administration what those risks are. So it's not new that we've been doing that. Those are not new. They've always been there. And then in the last year, we had a new audit standard that said if you have significant estimates, those equate to significant risks. So that's why you're seeing additional amounts this year. So your OPEB, your pension, leases, those types of things are significant estimates. So then by nature, they are significant risks. So that's why it went up.
Okay. And also, Tyler, thank you to you and your team. This is just a glowing audit report, and your attention to detail and diligence, it comes out loud and clear in this report, so thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments or thoughts? No?
Clean audit's always awesome. Yeah, glad there was no findings, and you answered the question I was gonna ask about the food service for Pacific pupils, so.
All right.
Thank you. Thank you for
All your hard work.
the hard work and hanging around for the remainder of this evening. Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Sure, and thank you for giving me some time to go over this. And before I leave, I want to thank Tyler and the team. I think it's really a credit that here we are at the beginning of November, everything is done, and you prepare the annual comprehensive financial report. That's a big ask, and a lot of extra information, a lot of extra work. So appreciate all that you do.
Thanks.
All right. Well, that, having achieved our tonight's agreed upon agenda items and having no further items to cover, I now call this meeting adjourned for the Board of Education. Thank you.